for joining us for tonight's talk entitled Art Making and Art Therapy as part of the exhibition Tints of Resilience, curated by Rania. We are here sitting in this room amongst the work, this important and relevant work of this time in the world. Our speakers tonight will talk us about the power of art and how art can help overcome trauma. The artist Diala Brisly will discuss her journey from war in Syria to the activism she's done in Lebanon, and then her artwork in Europe and her work with children. Art therapist and expert in the field, Mira Saad, will express her perspective on what the difference is between creating art for art's sake, or an expression, to art therapy and what that means. She will talk about it in the context of Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq. And I think she will also touch upon post-traumatic stress in the context of Lebanon and the aftermath. But before I hand over the mic, and before we hear these really important talks, I'd like to read their biographies and talk a bit about their life in detail. So Diala Brisly is a painter and an illustrator. She was born in Syria. She began her career... Oh, you're born in Kuwait?
Yeah.
Okay.
But
right.
forget about it.
Okay. I got my info wrong.
Yeah, no worries. Who cares?
So she began her career as a cartoonist at the Syrian-based Space Toon channel in 2001, and soon became a layout artist for a variety of cartoon TV shows. At the outset of the Syrian conflict in 2011, Diala participated artistically in social campaigns and projects focused on social justice and freedom. In 2014, she started painting murals and conducting art workshops in refugee centers to support access to education for children, refugees. Mira Saad is an art therapist and the founder of Artichoke Studio, an art therapy center in Lebanon committed to promoting art therapy as a recognizable, available, and affordable mental health profession in the region. Mira graduated from Lesley University in America in art therapy and mental health counseling. For about 8 years, she's been working between the US and Lebanon as an art therapist in hospitals, prisons, rehab centers, and refugee camps. Having lived through the civil war in Lebanon, Mira's interest turned to psychological trauma. Mira is a member of the International Expressive Arts Therapy Association. So after we hear these two speakers talk about the power of art and how art can overcome trauma, we'll open it up to you if you have any questions for about 20 minutes. And then if you have not had a chance to see the exhibition, I do urge you to walk around, see the artwork. It's very important artwork that the artists have produced and some of the children in the camps have also produced. So thank you very much. Yeah.
Hello, everyone. First, I want to start with something, like I had a conversation with someone from the FSA, like Free Syrian Army, in 2013 when I was in Istanbul, and he told me, yeah, your art is cool, but it's not going to change anything politically. And I found this like a big challenge for me, and I wanted to prove like art could do something, because I don't want it to have this like kind of career, like kind of luxury, like painting could suit the couch or something. So yeah, I will start from the very beginning. I started doing art as a career in 2001, as she said, in Space Toon channel, and in 2005. I became a freelancer, so I started like working with the magazines, different magazines, like you can see in the screen. So they were like magazines in Syria, distributed like one of them called Niloufer, and the other one is Faris. But these two, they were like magazines after the uprising, Syrian uprising. I met a group of people. They are running a magazine distributed for free in liberated areas in Syria. So the aim of this magazine, Zaytun and Zaytuna, was just like to keep the kids in the track of reading and like entertain them, just because they were like out of education for a long time. So the one with the kid like flying with the books. I'm sorry, but because most of the stories, they are really sad. But this one I made it, and the day after there was a kid in Aleppo who was selling chocolate for kids who are going out from school, and he got killed the day after. So I wanted to make it as a salute for him. And the other one, it was like a message for kids who are living in refugee camps, because we can't really help them to get out of this place. So at least we can empower them and support them to feel like they can change their own environment and work on it. And there is this one, Be Friends with Your Fears. It's as well for traumatized kids who are living in refugee camps inside of Syria and outside of Syria. But like this magazine was like inside of Syria and liberated areas. So we were trying to always support the kids to feel like stronger. And the other one is about a dream catcher. So there's someone wrote the story of grandmas, Native American grandmas during the war. When they were losing their lands, they were making this dream catcher and hang it over their beds before they sleep, so to catch their beautiful dreams. So we thought we can put this story in this Nailufer magazine, so kids they know that other kids they had the same experience and they can be inspired by it. Sometimes we do stories that they are not related at all about to war or the situation, because we want kids to just stay in contact with a normal life. So it's about Rainbow Man who goes to cities and goes to different towns, but everyone is really very busy, so they don't notice his rainbow. So then he goes to a countryside, and kids they were very excited to see the rainbow. It's about a journey, about going in a history class in a school. It's like illustration books for kids. So this one looks maybe very simple, but it means to me a lot. I made it after a month of my brother's death. He got killed by landmine, and I call it "Be My Leg, I Will Be Your Arm," because I felt that time that I am sharing something with other Syrian families that they lost a member of their family. So it really means to me a lot, even if it looks very childish. Now things are changing, and there was refugee crisis, but they are going out of nowhere, and they don't have any goal. They don't know where they will settle down, and I mean, even me, I had the same feelings. I don't know if I'm going back to Syria or I'm staying wherever. So I got rejected 6 times in my life for visas. So I did this other one standing over the Syrian passport. That is really useless. So I think you all know this Pied Piper story. It's a German story that the one who plays the flute who gets all the rats outside of the town. And people, they didn't appreciate it, so then he took all the kids out of the town. So me and my sister, we were in the car. I was driving in a checkpoint waiting for hours, and me and my sister were talking we wish if we had a Pied Piper and take all these soldiers and fighters away out of Syria. So, but I did this in 2017. I kept this sketch in my head, and then I did it in 2017. So I put different kinds of troops, armed troops. They are taken by Piper outside of Syria. I wanted to do a big collection of maps, but I just did these 2. My dear country is falling apart, and this a big hole underneath her face is the future that is mysterious. This has happened recently because now what is happening with the oppositions. There is like always many towns under siege, and after a while, when they get exhausted, they send them back. They send them to the north of Syria. So that one was like in Ghouta in Damascus suburb. There wasn't electricity, of course, and like a lot of people, they were holding their mobile to find any alive people still. And because I live here now in Europe, and we still go to concerts and we have a normal life, and it makes me think of this contradiction when we hold our mobiles just to have a light and have fun in this concert, but they were just searching for a life. And the other boy, because there wasn't like any space in the field hospital, so he was holding his blood bag and the other bags. So I imagined like he's like holding even his like memories and like his emotions and his childhood. This is my work in murals. Like I started in 2014, my first mural. I never thought of making mural before, but I met a girl when I had a visit in Beirut, and she was telling me she's really excited to open a public library in Arsal. It's an area in Lebanese Syrian borders, and there was a lot of Syrian refugees. And I told her, like, look, I can move to Beirut and I can work with you on this project, and we can really collect donations and books. We can do public libraries everywhere. So when I did this first mural, and when I saw that kids, they were really excited about it, and they wanted to see what is happening inside of the school. So that encouraged me and inspired me to do more murals. So I did it for 2 years. Like I started doing these murals even in a school tents for alternative education. Many kids in Lebanon, they can't go to attend to Lebanese schools. So there is like different organizations. They open like tent schools for alternative education, but they don't have any certificate. But at least they are still on the track. They don't have the same curriculum of like normal schools, but at least that we can keep them busy, and we can keep them like on the same track of reading and like learning math and like different kind of subjects. So yeah, I was like going from place to another to paint these murals. This one in UNHCR building in Beirut as well. The one on the left, we did it with kids, refugee kids from Sudan, Iraq, Ethiopia and Syrian. And the other one is inspired by a famous Lebanese singer. Her name is Fayrouz. And it's about like being like, it's kind of meditation, this song. So like just forgetting about the past and forgetting about the future and live the moment. I did this for a group of volunteers. Their name is Syrian Eyes, and they did like a center to teach adults how to deal with their kids in this like conflict time, and teach them and like improve their skills in English, computer like programs. So when I did this, it was my first time like dealing with adult in refugee camps, because usually I always work with kids. So I remember like there is like few people, they came to the center and they told me, with this like mural, I definitely want to attend this class. So I was like, why don't we work with adults? Because like we always think this kind of art is for kids, but I think really adults really need it even more. They need to feel like children as well. I had the chance to go to Austria, so I did this mural in a little town called Stulfelden. They have a traditional dance called Trestera. It's just for men from ages. So I was thinking like, why it should be just for men. So I did it like trestere Frau, and in German means trestere woman. So I did the same kind of like costume, but with the wild animals they have in this area. And they were afraid that someone would remove it because they were really fascist. But someone told me it's still there. This one, I really like this time I spent in Munich, because the kids who helped me in this mural, they always do fundraising to open more school tents in Bekaa Valley in Lebanon to support Syrian kids to have education. So the theme was like the clouds, they move very fast, especially you know, in Europe, like it's always cloudy. So I was telling the kids, if you have any positive message you wanna send it to other kids, you can draw or write something on these clouds. Some of them they drew crocodile, but it was fine. Because I moved to France, I don't have the chance to go to Lebanon anymore. I can't get a visa. I was really very sad because I really miss working in refugee camps. So I was thinking like, oh, okay, refugee camps, they are all made by canvas anyway. So I can make them on a big canvas and send them back to Lebanon. So I was talking to Jacqueline, who, the woman I work with in Munich. And I told her, well, how about like making big murals on canvas and can send it to you to Munich, and then you can take them to Lebanon. So now I do this project. Like I always, but it's really hard because they are 4x2, so it's hard to find a space to work on it. So sometimes I do it in just like a random park or wherever, like, or a garden. Yeah, this is one of them.
That's you.
Yeah, it's me. Yeah, because I always draw kids that are flying to encourage them, like by education they can really go out of the place, and because they are really stuck. In Washington D.C. there was like an event by World Bank about the Arab Spring, so they invited like a few Arab artists, but I didn't get the visa. So I told them, hey, listen, I already do murals and send them to Lebanon, so I'm used to it. How about making a mural and send it to you? And they said, oh, it's a great idea. So I did this. It's called Exit. It's inspired by this logo there, and you can see it like about Exit, but sometimes it comes with yeah, and it comes with a flame. So the flame is the war in Syria with all the memories, but like she is still stubborn and she still tries to catch her dreams, even like that. Okay, this collection is my latest collection, and it's in the exhibition, because usually I do things for other people. I don't do things for myself. It was really awkward in the beginning to draw myself, but I wanted to do it because usually I ask kids to draw themselves, to have this connection between them and themselves, and like have this self-confidence, and like to empty all their like bad feelings or their fears and everything. So the first one, I call it Shattered. It's funny because this is the last one I finished from all these paintings, but it was the first sketch. So the pomegranate is about the society, like it's going apart, but the flowers is about the new generation. And I feel like during this I was like stuck in the middle between political activism and working in supporting education. Actually, now I'm more focused on like empowering education. And the other one is about integration in Europe, because whenever I go to a place, they ask me like, where are you from? I'm from Syria. And, oh, wow. And I was like, yeah, I have my camel outside, and something like this, yeah. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Put it outside of your shirt. Maybe you can.
So I'll be talking a little bit today about art therapy and what it is, and a little bit about the difference between art therapy and art making, and specifically going into three main cases or different types of traumas that I've worked with. I'm going to start with a story from Iraq. I work with Brian McCarthy, who's a toy photographer, usually working with Disney and Cartoon Networks, and his job is basically to photograph toys for these companies. But he started his own initiatives called War Toys Project to share the stories of the children affected by war. So basically we do art-based interviews with the children, and we ask them to share their stories that they would like to spread to the world. Then Brian takes the drawings and the stories, buy toys locally wherever we are, whether it's in Iraq or Lebanon, and then he used photography to create the stories of the children. 2 years ago, we were in Iraq, and in one of the groups, this lovely 10 years old girl shared a horrific story and through her drawing. One day in Mosul, she spent the day with her grandmother. Then she went home to find all of her family shot. Father, mother, brother, and she remembered specifically where each one of them got shot, and it was very bloody. And she shared the story with us. It was the first time she shares the story. She never talked about it with anyone. She never grieved. She never cried with someone. So it was quite touching and quite intense. Both Brian and I were very touched by this little girl, and we started to call her our girl. So she's always my girl and our girl. And then after giving her time to share this and sit with her, she requested another drawing, and she did the drawing next to it, which is a beautiful flower and the name of her dad in the heart. And it was literally as if she was kneeling to the grave of her father and honoring him with this flower. And this is Brian's interpretation of the story that was shot in Mosul. Last May this year, we went back to Iraq, and I was very intently wanting to follow up on this girl, knowing what happened with her. So I asked the social worker, and she told me that she actually moved back to Mosul like thousands of other families. And she added that actually the girl lived with her parents, with her mother and father and sister. And the story she shared was a lie. I was shocked, very perplexed. We very often work with children who tell us unreal stories, imagination, fantasies for one reason or another, and we work through that. But in this case, something felt off. The girl was very truthful. Something was off in the story. So still, I was very curious to know more about her, and I wondered a lot about what went on. We had one more day in Iraq, and we had 2 groups. And then the girl showed up in one of those groups. She has changed quite a bit in this little time. Girls do change a lot. And I was so anxious to come over her and ask her like a million questions. Of course, I didn't do that. We did ask the group when we started who remembers us from the past year, because there was a couple of children who were there the year before. She didn't mention anything. So I had to wait until she took her time, did the drawing, and raised her hands to ask me to come over and share the story. Then eventually, she does remember us. She actually remembers every single activity we did, every single word we said. And she added to the story without us asking that basically what happened is that after the incident happened in Mosul, her uncle got married and they never had children. So he adopted her and her sister, who also survived. They moved to Erbil, Debaga, and they didn't share the story to anyone, not social workers, not the people they were working with, because it was important for her to kind of safeguard the family and to be grateful to her uncle and aunt. She calls them mom and dad. So it was very, again, very personal, very thoughtful, and very touching what she shared. I was also very amazed by the strength she had. Her will to keep going, the way she talked about the event, the way she talked to herself and she told us the way she talks to other girls in the camps and the way she encouraged them, basically the way she kept on going with her life. This is the story from the second year that we worked with her. It was also the story of her being in school and the school being bombed by ISIS, and most of her friends survived, but one of her very favorite teacher actually passed away while the school was burning. So yet another loss. And here comes the question of basically what is trauma, what is resiliency, what is art making, and what did we offer this girl? Something that allowed her to share this horrific story with us. Was it just a pen and a paper? We just heard about, with Diala, how much she did with her art for herself and to others. So it's obvious that art is a way of self-expression. It's actually one of our very innate things we do as humans, is to creatively express ourselves. It also gives the artist some insight, and it gives the artist some satisfaction. Art can be used to advocate for causes, as activism, like Diala shared. So there are a big role in art making, in society, in history, and so on and so forth. But how is that different than art therapy? And is it different? So the next questions become, what is art therapy? To answer this question, I always like to give it a different context. Art therapy is a mental health profession. It is a form of psychotherapy. So it's quite different than merely art making for the sake of art or for the sake of activism or whatever reason it is. It is a form of psychotherapy. And I always like to simplify it and start by explaining what is a psychotherapy. I know there are different schools, tons of approaches, but I like to simplify it into 3 steps. The first one being having a safe space to express oneself. And by a safe space, I mean a place and a time where a person can say whatever they want, however they're feeling, without being judged, without being criticized, and without being told what to do and how to think. This is also very much based on a therapeutic relationship, a trusting and relationship where confidentiality plays a big role in all of that with the therapist. And then the expression, the free expression can happen. As a second step, with this expression and with the guidance of the therapist, the person starts to become more self-aware of their thinking patterns, of their behaviors, of their emotions, of what's going on with them, to eventually slowly start to learn healthy solution on how to deal with these adversities in life. Then art therapy is the same thing that happens, except the whole process is through art making, or more precisely, creative expression. Because in art therapy, we never focus on the aesthetics of the work that is done. I always tell the people I work with that there's no right or wrong, beautiful or ugly. If you want to scribble, in Arabic, if anyone speaks Arabic here, we say tkhirbush djej, like scribbles of chicken. That's always welcome. Because after that, what we do is actually we give it time of reflection. We do reflect on what happened through this process. And what's really beautiful about visual expression, it's that our emotions and thoughts and whatever is going on inside of us take a concrete shape outside of us. And we literally have this distance, and we can look at it with different perspectives. And this is one of the ways how we start to gain insight about what's going on with us. And even the first step, which is the third step, which is the change, can happen with the art. When we have something concrete in front of us, we can add to it. We can subtract to it. We can rip it off. We can give it as a gift. We can exhibit it. We can do so much with it. And that experience of exploring what we can do with the art also helps us to explore what we can do with our emotions, or what we can do, how we can change ourselves. And as I said previously, this is a very important component in therapy in general and in psychotherapy, is to have a therapist. And this component is totally not present when someone is doing art by themselves. And the role of the art therapist is quite important. First and foremost, we facilitate establishing this safe space. This space where a person are free to express themselves in the presence of someone else. So the role of the therapist is actually also to witness. In our training, we learn to listen visually and auditorily. So we don't just listen to what the person is saying verbally, but we also observe what they're saying in the art that they're making. From the moment that they pick up the materials, we notice the materials they chose, how they started the work, how it changed, the layering that may have happened, how it ended, where it ended, and what did they do with it afterwards. So it's really a thorough process. One of the very important things is also to hold everything that comes up, because art making sometimes can be triggering, and people may end up having overwhelming emotions. So the role of the therapist is actually to contain all of that and to be able to hold it and not let the person leave the room in a state that's worse than when they came in, because a lot of things can happen, even though it's very playful and creative and it can be fun, but lots of things can be triggered inside. So what to do with all of that? It's also part of the training. And something very often I'm asked, which is also the next question, is whether we interpret, no, I'm sorry, not the next question, whether we interpret the art that is done, whether we can see a drawing and tell the person what's wrong with them. We surely don't do that, but we guide the person with questions. We ask the person questions so they answer themselves, because no one knows the person more than themselves. Few things also to know about art therapy is that we work with all ages and all kinds of different populations. So it's not just for children. As Diala said, adults love it. Adults love to be playful, but we just very often don't give ourselves that time. So we do work with all ages, and we, as art therapists, we work with all kinds of different cases. So from people suffering from chronic illnesses, whether it's physical or mental disorders, to individuals who are simply going into a difficult period, whether it's anxiety or depression or the loss of someone, all the way to people who are simply seeking self-development. We also work with all kinds of materials, from drawings, collage, clay, everything. And actually, we also focus on the characteristics and qualities of every material while we are planning the work and our treatment goals. Some materials can trigger a sense of loss of control. Others can be more focused into building. A very simple example I can give is the difference between Play-Doh, which is very fun and playful, and it can go into fantasies and monsters and creatures, versus working with clay, which is very earthy. It reminds us of the body. It reminds us of the soul. We can go into places that has to do with death, with sexuality, a totally different place. So being trained and being aware of what kinds of materials we're offering the individuals we're working with is also very important. And here comes the other question, which I kind of previously answered, whether we do analyze the work that comes out. There are lots of books out there about what certain colors mean and what certain symbols means, but actually there are no scientific academic studies that shows certain colors and symbols means the same thing over time, over cultures, over generations. A simple example I can give tons of examples, but one that very often I give is if an individual drew a person wearing orange, what would that mean? If someone is from Lebanon, they would say that this person is affiliated to a certain political party that has orange as a symbol. Other person may say, this is an inmate, a prisoner in the US prisons, they were orange. Someone else may say, this is a monk in the Tibetan mountains. So really, we cannot just simplify it as certain colors and symbols mean certain thing. And to focus on the process, I would like to ask all of you, what would you see in this image? If anyone want to throw anything.
A flower.
A flower.
Palm tree.
A palm tree.
Windmill.
A windmill, yeah. Some people even see a body in the black circle in pink. Basically, when this has also happened in a group with Brian in War Toys Project. So the girl started to draw a person sitting. And then she started to cover that person with circles all over. Me as an art therapist, I was of course observing all of that. And if I wasn't, I would have missed the whole story. And then she ended up with this drawing. So when I was inquiring about what she did, she eventually shared that she witnessed a woman being stoned. She was passing by and her mom covered her eyes, but she was still able to hear and she was still able to peek. And that she kept that story within her and she was never able to share it again with anyone because it's quite difficult. She even started to share the story with drawings, but that was too much, so she ended up covering it. But it's really interesting, even the way she covered it, is that the woman, if we do the next, you can see the person, the outlines of the person in the middle one, which is present here. So even the person ended up being covered in stone and buried underground. But it's really interesting, the process that she went through. And the last one is Brian's interpretation of the story. So and this is another example also. It may not show very well, but even though we don't interpret the drawings, but we're also trained to perceive certain things in images that individuals may create. In this case, it was also in the project, Tortoise Project, a girl drew two little girls being beaten and tortured by a man. And the stick that he was using was quite phallic. That's there, it's Brian's interpretation, but our role was surely to refer them to the child protection because we see the children just one time. So this can totally be a case of sexual abuse or torture or so on and so forth. So we are trained, of course, to pick up on these things without coming to quick assumptions, but to investigate further in this. So going back to trauma and resiliency. Trauma is obviously the emotional response to any terrible event that may happen, whether that's natural disasters, war, a loss of someone, witnessing some kind of event. Trauma can really be anything. And resiliency, the way APA defines it, is the process of adapting well in the face of adversity, trauma, tragedy, threats, or significant sources of stress. What I love about this definition is the use of the word process. Because resiliency, lots of people do the mistake that it's a trait that a person have or born with, which is not the case. Actually, resiliency is sets of behaviors, of thinking patterns, of tools that a person can actually learn to develop resiliency, to be able to have well-being again, to be able to face adversities in a more healthier way in the future. So it's really a process. It's not a trait that a person is born with or not. Another definition by an art therapist, actually, that I really like is resiliency is very different than being numb. Resiliency means you experience, you feel, you fall, you fail, you hurt, you fall, but you keep going. So having resiliency does not mean not being sad or forgetting everything, but it means feeling all that and still being able to keep on going, which is quite important. And many factors can contribute to a person being resilient, starting from developing self-confidence to learning communication skills, learning problem-solving skills, starting to gain a sense of control in one's life. So many things can contribute to building resiliency. But what's really nice, and again important to keep in mind, is that it's not only the individual, himself or herself, responsible to having or building their own resiliency. Family can play a role. Community and society can also be contributors to helping others have resilience. And actually, one of the main factors is having a supportive relationships for a person to be able to be resilient. So I'm going to start giving cases of trauma. I'll be talking about 3 different examples, starting with post-traumatic stress. Post-traumatic stress, the symptoms can include anxiety, fear of certain events happening again, lots of worries, disruption in sleep, disruptions in food intake, nightmares, flashbacks, and it can stay for a while. When we're doing our therapy, some of our goals is surely always starting by setting a safe environment for the person to express themselves. And by safety, it even includes the routine of the session if we get to do more than one session. And once we have safety, we start to dig deeper into an emotion, and we start working on learning ways to regulate difficult emotions. And we're getting time to grieve and to honor the missing person and so on. And a third thing becomes more the dynamics between the group, is building empathy between the group participants as well as a support network between themselves. And this is a way to leave the people we're working with something that they can use after we're gone, is having their own support system. So in this example, I was working with War Child Holland in Lebanon with Syrian and Palestinian refugees. This is one of the first steps. Whenever a way to create a safe environment is always to remind the children that in these groups, you can do whatever you want, whatever you feel like. The only rule is not to harm yourself or others. And by harming yourself or others, that includes verbally, physically, and in any possible way. So as long as you're not harming yourself or anyone, you're free to do whatever you want. And you can see that in the third image, where we explore all kinds of materials, and not just exploring the materials, they are actually literally all over the place. And that's okay, they can do that. So a second stage, we start working more in the emotions. And this is one of the activities where I ask the children to draw different emotions, starting with fear, anger, sadness, and even inner peace. And we put each of the collection of emotions in one wall, and we start to talk about it. And that allows us to start to depict the differences, for example, between anger and sadness. Very often the drawings depicting anger are blowing up, are red and orange and fiery and out of control and impulsive. And then we start to remind the children, okay, so what do you do when you're angry? I hit, I yell, I break. It's really an outer reaction, versus sadness is something very inner, very more low, more calm, more solitude. So the children start to depict these differences. And we even go further into discussing, for example, what's the difference? Can you be sad and have inner peace at the same time? And that allows the children actually to grieve. That yes, I can be sad for everything I lost. At the same time, I can seek having inner peace inside of me. And then as a last stage, with this group, for example, I loved recycling some papers, but it wasn't any paper. I asked the children to bring in all the images containing things that they want to get rid of, emotions, experiences, things that they want to get rid of. And it's basically to remind them that nothing disappears, everything transforms. So the experience they lived are not going to go away, but the way they deal with them can be different. And what's nice about this activity is that you see the children ripping off the paper and grinding them, and they really get into it. They really get into the action of actually ripping all this and making something different out of it. And what's beautiful also is that the paste that we use that we end up having have papers and images from all the group. So not every kid have their own papers, but we mix the paste. So at the end, each kid end up having a recycled paper with some parts of everyone in the group. And that's the way to kind of hold the group together before they leave. So this was talking about post-trauma. This is an informal test, informal pre and post test that I did. It has 10 sentences. I give the children 10 sentences. They all begin with I, like I am, I love, I hate, I need, and so on. We did it at the beginning and we did it at the end. When we did it, I had no expectations what's going to come up, but what came up was really nice. So very often they started with I'm Palestinian, I love my country, I hate the enemy, I want to go back to my country, so on and so forth. It ended up being I am, the name of the girl, and I love my friends. I hate injustice. I feel lonely. All the way to I know that there are people who love me, and I know that I can love. I'm sad, and the world is sad. So it didn't end up being flowers and rainbows and happy emotions. But what's really important here is that she was considered not just a number, a refugee, or a nationality. She was a person that has emotions, that can express the emotions. And most importantly, the resiliency is in that she knows that there are people who love her, and she knows that she has the power to love others, which is what we wanted to get to in the first place. So now I'm going to talk about a different kind of trauma. A kind of trauma you don't hear a lot in the North global part of the world, because it's not about post-trauma. It's about continuous traumatic stress, and that is quite different. So post-trauma, we work with it whenever the trauma has ended. An event happened and it's ended, or that the person is out of the context of where the trauma happened. But in the global south of the world, very often people live in context where trauma is ongoing. The threat is always ongoing. And this concept started in South Africa in the apartheid times, and it has some interesting characteristics. One of them is that the trauma is ongoing. It's not something that is done and over with. And then the second one is that the danger is faceless. That is different from the cases of domestic violence, for example. In domestic violence, you have a recurrent trauma. That trauma keeps on going. But in those cases, the perpetrator has a face. You know where the threat is coming from. In continuous traumatic stress, you don't know. You may be walking on the street and the car next to you may bomb. You don't know where the threat is going to come from, and that's kind of add to the dimensions. And on top of that, you live in a system, you live in a place where there's no trusting system that can defend you and protect you. So basically you live in a mess, or you live in a place where there's no government, there's no entities that you know you can trust. And then the last thing from all of this is being able to discriminate between real threat and not a threat that is not real. Because eventually we do want the people to be aware of threats and to protect themselves. At the same time, not to go to the extreme of being hypervigilant. So that's quite difficult to manage between the two. This is also actually, there are lots of articles about therapists working in these contexts, because as therapists ourselves, we start to also question, like, what are we supposed to do? Like, how are we going to save them? Very often, therapists live in the same context as well as the people they're working with. In these contexts, our goals, one of them, my supervisor and I focused on the humanitarian art therapy approach of continuity principle, which basically focuses that the person has characteristics, certain functions that are always continuous in himself, and we thought that that fits the continuous traumatic stress very well. So basically our goals become, first we want to manage anxiety. And that reminds the person that you can always be functional, not necessarily just anxious. The second one is dealing with past trauma and loss, and adding to that the recognition that more losses can still happen. But that does not undermine the fact that the previous lost relationships don't have any value. So it's also giving value to everything. And the last one is reinforcing a sense of integrity, which means that there are parts of ourselves that stays with us no matter what happens to us. A part of me will always be me no matter what happens around me. Of course, there's sometimes a sense of loss of identity and so on and so forth, but we kind of bring back to that point. So some of the activities we work with, of course, is what's always making you anxious, what are your constant worries, and how can we manage that and protect ourselves from that. And then other questions is, what keeps you going? And these are really deep questions. Even sometimes we need to ask ourselves these ones because it's not so obvious. Like, what keeps you going? What makes you wake up every day no matter what's happening around you? It really makes the person go down to the core and stick to certain beliefs, mission, purpose, meaning in life. Another one is, what is the one thing that no one can take away from you? One thing that no matter what happens, no one can take away. Very often we get responses like belief. One time even a little girl told me my shadow. And that was really beautiful because then we agreed as a group, it's like, okay, whenever we miss each other, we're gonna walk and look at our shadows and remember that I have my shadow, they have their shadows, and we look at each other's shadow and we remember each other. So it's really nice and meaningful. And for example, this woman shared that her love for her family, no matter what happens, that's not going to go away, whether they're present or not. Another form of trauma is ambiguous loss. This is the last example I'm going to give for tonight. You don't know where the person is physically, but psychologically there's no closure, and we can't think that the person just simply died. The type 2 is the other way around, where the person is physically present, but psychologically is not. And that's the case, for example, in Alzheimer's diseases, where the person is there, he's physically there, but psychologically they're not the same person anymore. And in these cases, it's really difficult to work with. And in our case, we're going to talk specifically about the type 1, which is while I worked with families of the missing in Lebanon. So families who have members that went missing from 30, 40 years ago in one way or another, and they don't know where the person is. That is quite challenging because the families want to keep on hoping that their loved one is alive, and we cannot take that away from them, especially that sometimes after 25 years, some people come back and are alive. At the same time, they want to kind of rest and move on with their life, and that's almost impossible and comes with a lot of guilt, because what if the person's still alive? So there's a lot of this ambiguity and being stuck in a place or a time or hanged up in the air. And what adds to that is, of course, that there are no closures. You know, when someone passes away, there are often rituals, funerals. That gives a closure to the family. That also gives a recognition from the community that a person has passed away. So that recognition in itself is also not there. And you cannot honor the person. So there are lots of things there. And our goals with these families is, of course, to start with help them deal with the ambiguity or live with the ambiguity and whatever that comes with them. But really, we wanted to work on helping them have something tangible, since they live in an almost untangible world or things that they cannot control or sense. So we really wanted to work with them on something tangible and something that helps them honor the missing. So we did a project with the ICRC, the International Committee of the Red Cross, and a local NGO in Lebanon called Act for the Disappeared, where we do a couple of our therapy psychosocial support sessions with the families. And these sessions end up with each family painting a chair that represents the missing person. So we take our time to narrate the stories, to know more about the person. So it's not just a number, it's actually what was the person. In some cases, like in this example, a woman has lost her mom and her dad, so both of them disappeared. So she decided this is the only photo she has of her mother, father, and herself. And she decided to cut that photo in half and put the father on one side and the mother on one side, and literally she's cut in half in between. So if the two chairs are together, you can see her in the middle. We did this work. It was very challenging at the beginning to start, because most of the people we're working with are in their 50s and 70s, and to tell them that we're going to represent a person on a chair was too abstract for them. With the first group, I remember we kept on talking about it, and then when we brought the chair, someone was like, oh, so we're drawing on the chairs, which is really, it takes a while. And then we did an exhibit a year and a half ago on April 13, which is when the war started in Lebanon, April 13. We started with 25 chairs, and it was really important for the families, because from one hand, like the big elephant in the room that the family doesn't talk about, the members of the family start to talk about. Even some chairs were done by 3 generations. The grandmother, the daughter, and the son of the daughter. So we built some connection. The family was able to talk about it. They recognized, and it was really important for them also that the media came, that their cause has been recognized. And from there on, many of them started to advocate and be much more active in their cause. And that, again, was one of our goals, that they feel that they have something to do, that they can have something tangible, that they can honor the missing. Now we have around 70, 80 chairs, and we're working on having more than 100 and then having a huge exhibit in Beirut, so we're crossing the fingers that that would work. So this is it for now, but I would like to end actually with a question. I mentioned somewhere in the exhibit that not just the individual can be a contributor to resiliency, but also the society, the community, and the family. So a nice question to keep in mind or ask ourselves, what are we doing to be contributor of resiliency? Whether it's our own, because that's also very important, or that's that of others around us. So thank you.